Hello, everybody, and welcome to our 2025 Social Outlook. We're getting people in here, so we'll let you get settled in. We'll test our amazing chat function, make sure it works, because that's always fun, and then we'll get into it. It's jam-packed of really cool stuff. Sometimes disturbing, sometimes interesting, sometimes exciting. So we'll get going right away here. While folks are joining, always love to see who's in the room. So let's do, yeah, perfect. Do some hellos. If you know the territory or First Nations community, Métis settlement, or if you know the Indigenous name of your community, put that in there too. Name, hello, organization you're joining, city, whatever you want to share. That would be awesome. Okay, Carla from Tree 6, Paul, Silo. Hey, Paul, how's it going, buddy? We're doing some interesting stuff with Paul. He says, good, you? Great. And Norma from Native Counseling Services. Hello, Norma. Treaty 6, of course. Bonjour. Okati from Ontario. Hello, Parveen. Lisa, Treaty 7, City of Calgary. Let's see who else we got here. Joe Bring, Exec Director from Lotus Humanitarian, Abbotsford. Love Abbotsford. Williams Lake. Hi, Williams Lake. Williams Lake First Nations. Interesting. We're doing some work with TNG, Slitinko National Government, close in your neck of the woods. So welcome. I'll do a couple more. Alberta municipalities in Edmonton from Kelly. Cool. You'll be interested in our next webinar too, Kelly, because it's with your colleagues from the Ontario Association of Municipalities. Let's see. I'll do a couple more. Alana from Encompass, Edmonton John Howard. Cool. Like the new name too. That's awesome. Anna Huron from Robinson Territory. Okay, I'll get into it, you guys, just because we have so much, but please continue to say hello. This is as much as you connecting with each other as it is about us connecting with you. So like I said, without further ado, we will get into it. So hopefully you can see my screen. It should be a nice swirly 2025 with the Canada Social Outlook while Rapids ahead. I was trying to come up with what's the theme for the year, and I think you'll agree in a second that this is absolutely the case as we get into it. What we wanted to do for this social outlook, and we do these once a year, is to obviously talk about the general macro trends and how they might play out in the nonprofit, provincial, municipal, social sectors that we're obviously very embedded in and connected to, but also get you some additional deeper dives on some less known data trends that we think are going to be an interesting data signals to keep track of as the year unfolds as well. So with that being said, I will start with our land acknowledgement as well. And just a shout out to all of you that are joining us across Turtle Island, and for us, Help Seekers team is in every corner of this country. And again, we're always keeping this at the forefront of our work. And there's probably never a report we write or a presentation we give without talking about the need for reconciliation and the role of data in reconciliation being a really core theme that we can bring to the table in our work on a day-to-day basis. So we wanted to highlight a couple of items in terms of Canada's global context in particular. And the big picture here, of course, is that we've got our commodity, and here's our a little bit about that. We've got some interesting happenings on the macroeconomic front, and of course, the global trade uncertainties being a crucial piece of this. So we know 75% of exports still flow from one main customer, the US. It's a very risky setup, as we can imagine, because it's a customer that's now raising these trade barrier considerations. And we're also starting to see the US subsidies starting to favor American-made goods like electric vehicles, while all our oil sector contends with crude prices at about $77. So throw that in with Russian sanctions, OPEC production, And again, if you don't know much about this stuff, I'll tell you why it matters in a second. But it's a turbulent global marketplace from that macro perspective. Bank of Canada is really laser focused on that 2% inflation. So keeping that inflation under control, that's going to make the mortgage prices near to 5%. And a slowdown is going to mean in terms of housing construction. As you guys know, of course, we are short some 240,000 housing units every year. So that is going to continue to make affordability a really, really major issue. So that combined with the immigration targets coming down again, which was a very much political reaction, that's going to suggest that we're going to see sectors, affordable housing, continue to tighten, even though we're going to have less skilled trade workers coming in and an aging population. At the same time, we've got our sectoral transformation. So the big AI push, we're juggling some major transitions in energy and manufacturing at the same time. And the disruption of the white collar is definitely at play as well. So what does that mean for frontline and admin staff in nonprofits and local government? These could definitely mean a heavier demand for social supports coming up. If layoffs happen in oil or manufacturing specifically, of course, Alberta, Ontario coming top of mind, but it's going to have ripple effects everywhere. More families struggling with housing costs. Smaller towns with fewer resources might feel this even harder because of the limited staff and the need to potentially handle some sudden spikes. Requests for food security, crisis counseling, job retraining, all of those things are the big picture economic impacts that we might all feel. Now, digging into the escalating US-Canada trade war risks and economic populism and provincial realities. I mean, just like last year, I said in the time last year for the outlook, I said let's just prepare for a Trump government, and let's just assume that that's going to happen. Maybe it's the kind of the most extreme versions, and prepare for that. And then if it's something else, then at least we have a contingency plan. I think for us this year, it's going to be a polyamorous government. That's kind of my call. You can call me out on it later on. And I think it's going to be a Doug Ford and Ontario call as well. So these are the ones I'm watching really closely because first of all, they're entwined. Doug Ford wanted to call the election ahead of the federal component, but what's interesting is the positioning around populism for him around the Canada war and trade war with the US, and him being the great defender of Canada and in the absence of national leadership. But these trade tensions in our political landscape, so with Ontario being so heavily tied to US markets, about a quarter of the GDP there depends on cross-border trade. So steel, auto tariffs, if those flare up, Windsor, Oshawa are going to feel it. So communities are going to start to, are going to be at a greater risk for social ramifications if this continues in a concerning direction. But Alberta too could suffer these energy exports and get really caught up in these trade disputes. So with that being in top of mind, local officials, nonprofits often find themselves rushing to respond to emergency funds and rapid retraining programs. So be on the lookout. Watch this because it might manifest in a package, right? In a package that you have to respond to quickly, or consultations of, what are we going to do with these populations? So doing some of that pre-work to have a plan in place if this happens is really advisable for sure, especially if you're in one of those communities that are highly dependent on cross-border traffic, crude oil, and so on. I call this slide the elections buffet because we've got it's jam-packed in 2025. That in and of itself means that there's going to be lots of fluttering, lots of election promises, just lots of activity and uncertainty, right? There's money being spent and then there's money being clawed back. And so there's going to be a lot of uncertainty around funding for sure overall. So when I say jam-packed, let's take a look. We've got the Ontario election in February 27. We got Alberta municipal, October 20th. federal, October 20th, unless of course something changes. Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, Nunavut, Quebec. These are some big, big elections. And don't forget that we've got some additional ones coming up the following years as well. So just because it's 2025 is around the corner, these are going to start to be ramping up too. So advocacy for BC's municipal election in 2026, people are going to start to get their policy agendas ready and their funding asks ready to go this year. So I would say if you're planning to have an advocacy campaign in 2026, you should start your research on whatever you're going to be pitching now, for sure. So that's the elections buffet. So what does that mean for us? As I said, different parties are going to bring, I would say the populist appeal seems to be the overarching trend. So the whole axe to tax, if you're familiar with that, that could reshape the carbon pricing and redirect social funding. So for nonprofits and municipal staff, that means you should prepare for and have those contingency plans I mentioned, and keep close tabs on which grants or programs could be upended by a sudden policy shift. So doing that risk analysis, looking at the likely candidates and their positions to understand how to start your positioning now, right? Start to get on top of what the election platforms look like so that you can ready yourself for that shift. And of course, you got to have your data ready, because the one thing that all of these
Alina,
yeah,
your head's blocking the text. We have some messages in the
okay, how about, is it okay now?
Yeah, that's better, but if you go to another screen it might block it again.
Okay, cool. Taj, you totally have my permission to tell me which way to tilt my head.
Go to your left. Yeah, that's good.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, Taj. We're trying something new so that you're not just like looking at the slide by yourself. So appreciate that. So check it out. Here's the elections again, just so you guys see them. And of course, we're going to share the deck and everything like that. Yeah. And this is, of course, Trump. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Canada's not for sale. But to the point around populist politics is the takeaway here. So my advice is, like I said, prep those scenarios, get your pitch and get the data ready. These guys all have something in common, in that they do listen to data, right? No matter what political slant you're at, if you have the numbers and if you've done your homework and you've done your research and you're coming prepared, not with a handout, you're coming with evidence and you're having a pragmatic conversation about what's happening, then you're much more likely to have that success. All right, let's go to this one. So, okay, Taj, how am I doing with my head?
You'd have to go far right.
All right, okay, thank you. How about this?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, I can also stop my video. Is that better? All together?
Yeah.
Yes.
Cool. Okay, right on. Okay, well, you guys know I'm a talking head in the background, so you can trust me that I'm here. So I wanted to also chat about the macro population dynamics, not because I know you know, right? I know you know that the aging population string systems, I know you understand the urbanization and housing crunch, and I know you know that slower population is happening because we're bringing in less immigrants now. So we've shifted our how many immigrants were immigration targets. So I'm by no means am I telling you something we don't know. The important part is these macroeconomic population dynamics. You got to layer them into what I said before about the politics as well, because these macros don't change as quickly, but their nuance in your community does shift. And you just have to revisit these things on an ongoing basis, because there's ongoing risks and demands and trends that are always impacting what's happening around you. So for municipal administrators, for instance, the housing crisis is going to mean there's pressure to accelerate, for instance, construction permits and expand those affordable housing programs. If you're a nonprofit, you might see more newcomers and more seniors seeking emergency housing or looking for help navigating rental markets. And we definitely saw that in one of our signals last year was around seniors sleeping in cars as an example of a new, I'm not saying that's never happened before, I'm saying that it's happening more. So how these things manifest in your community, you got to, remember, connect the dots to why it's happening at the macro level and then look for it locally because it's probably happening. You just haven't come across it potentially, or it might just look a little bit more nuanced depending on your local context. Smaller provinces like those in Atlantic Canada, for instance, you might start to struggle recruiting doctors, nurses, and social workers. And we've been relying quite a bit on immigration pools of foreign trained professionals and getting them into our workforce. If those pressures, immigration pressures, constrain that supply, you might continue to struggle with that because it has a ripple effect across the board. And that pressure might intensify in those local elections I mentioned. So again, Newfoundland Labrador election is November 2025. It probably is going to come up in those elections. So these things play into, and I'm saying you can predict oftentimes what the headlines are going to be if you really think about the data at this level. So for a nonprofit that might be offering healthcare or seniors programs, you're probably going to feel that additional pressure. So if you know it's going to be an election issue and you're seeing the numbers go up, this is a good time to get that moving. My team, anything in the chat that I need to address before I move to the next slide?
Yeah, your icon is still blocking the slide.
Oh geez. Okay, let me see. Can you move the photo in front of the slides? Oh, okay. Okay, let me see. So this one, how about now? Is that okay?
No, it's still
No.
showing like your facial icon in the bottom left corner of the screen.
I see. There's something in my settings. Okay. Let me see you guys. Sorry about that. It's what we get for trying something new. We might have to. Oh yeah, I see where my face is. How annoying. Let me see how I can deal with that. It might just be that you guys need to deal and we'll drop the link. How about this? We're gonna drop the link to the document if you get super annoyed, and then we'll kind of, I'll just remember that this is an annoying thing for y'all to deal with. And unfortunately, I have no idea how to fix it without coming back in. So my team, I'm dropping the link in our chat here, and you can share that and folks can deal. Yeah, sorry guys.
Sounds
How annoying.
We'll also email it out to everyone after as well.
Yeah. Because I don't want to like come back in and then, slow us down. Okay. Hopefully this does okay. Awesome. Okay, we've got some folks agreeing with me. So here's an interesting component, and I said I wanted to get into a couple of interesting components on what I'm seeing as interesting, but not going to be as obvious to everyone else. So we dug into some interesting data on OAS. And this is an interesting component where the data actually points to some interesting trends. So old age security, and again, I talked a little bit about OAS in terms of where seniors are going as a population trend. But let's take a look at some deeper analysis on data that's less familiar, because not everybody has time to be doing this type of work all the time. How's my face in comparison to the screen, Taj?
It's okay right now.
It's okay right now?
Yeah, it's blocking a little bit, but it's all right.
How about now?
Still about the same.
Okay, so it doesn't matter if I make it bigger. Okay, cool. So here we're looking at OAS trends over time, and let me show you this in a little bit more detail. The big takeaway is that it's increasing, right? So this means that there's going to be a higher, obviously, expenditure, and that's exactly what's happening. So OAS, if you don't know what it is, $713 a month for people over 65 who meet residency requirements. It's a universal benefit in theory, but there's a clawback once your income exceeds, I think, $91,000. So there's that piece. And then, of course, we've got the GIS, which offers about $1,065 for seniors with very low income. So this is a really good indicator for low income. And the ratio of OAS to GIS is interesting too, because that tells us what proportion of folks are in that situation. There's a less known one called the allowance. And this one is much smaller, as you can see from a numbers perspective, but it's another important one as well to keep in mind. As the boomer population retires, we've got OAS costs that can rise to about 3% of our GDP in the next 10 years or so, up from about 2.5% now. So fewer working age people are around to pay for this system. So there's going to be an intergenerational equity debate brewing for sure. On the ground, nonprofits might see more seniors, like I said, looking for help with applications for benefits like the OAS. But what we're also seeing on the ground is that these benefits that are the mainstay of our social safety net are no longer keeping up with that cost of living that we just went through a bubble on. Very different dynamics in different provinces for sure around, as you can see, the relationship here. This is Ontario, and let's take a look at Yellowknife, right? So very different in terms of the curve growth and the proportion of GIS to OAS. So I'm definitely saying look out for this because it's very different in one community to another. So if we look at Manitoba, because we know we've got some team members here from Manitoba. So comparing OAS, GIS, and the allowance, how they've played out here versus Alberta, and I'll show you Alberta, just kind of watch how the numbers change, right? And the general shape of the image. Alberta shows a much more dramatic growth, right? So it moves from about 400,000 to near 700,000 OAS recipients because much more baby boomers are retiring there in the province. Manitoba, though, rises a little bit more stably, right? So you can see it's much more stable here. Okay, so as those rise from about 175 to 225K, they have a more, seemingly a much more stable population pattern as well. So why does that matter? Well, it suggests those smaller provinces might see a more consistent age trend, which means you can prep a little bit better for it. But Alberta, with these sharp rises, could suggest it's catching up in terms of senior population, because again, Alberta used to be a younger population for sure overall. And that near-term pressure on healthcare, housing, and social services there might feel much more intense, right? So I'm not saying these are not issues everywhere. I'm just saying provincially there are variances to keep in mind. So that's this piece. Okay, coming back to another data point here, and again, please let me know how my head is going. Don't worry, you don't need to know what this says. I will show you what it says. This is just another way of looking at that GIS as a percentage of OAS. So why does this matter? Again, remember GIS, and I'll just show you like a small province that we haven't looked at. This is Nova Scotia. So this is just a percentage of the GIS from the OAS. GIS is like for low-income seniors, and OAS is for everyone. So that suggests here that the higher that percentage is, that suggests that poverty becomes an increasing issue, right? Because that's seniors' poverty. It's an early signal of seniors' poverty is what we're trying to say here. So Atlantic provinces hover around that, this 35 to 40, but like Newfoundland and Labrador, as you can see, much higher, right? So it's a really interesting indicator to watch around seniors' poverty rates. This is just showing us 2012. I just took it off but the bottom, it's 2012, and then the right-hand side is 2024. So you can see it's kind of decreasing, but overall Newfoundland is way, way higher than, Nova Scotia, which are interesting because those are very similar provinces, similar in our heads, right? As people that don't live there, we fully understand how distinct they are. So that's just to say that all of these trends matter because where we have volatility, smaller populations, some regions may rely much more heavily around GIS than others. And so this might be an earlier indicator than just watching for the poverty rate every 6 years. These numbers get published much more frequently if you're concerned about seniors' poverty. And if you're a frontline worker, for instance, in Atlantic Canada, you may need to provide some extra help for seniors dealing with those higher living costs on a fixed income. Municipal planners might look at local top-ups for specialized subsidy programs, for instance. So you can plan for these things, as you can see these upticks in the data suggesting that this may be the case. So that's another interesting component. Then next one and last one on this is to just make the point again about what's happening around, obviously our population is continuing to grow, but not as crazy as before, right? So this is just showing our population, 35 million in 2012 and about 41 million in 2024. And of course, when we look at our next percent of the population that's on OAS, so these are people that are tapping into that benefit. So these are seniors that are relying on that income. It's about 18% of our population, obviously a little bit more than that, but it's been rising. So this is another really good signal of that dependency on a social safety net for these benefits as well. Now, the interesting part is how this projection looks when we just roll it out another 10 years. And you can see here, it's significant, right? So when people say that social safety net strain is going to become a major issue, remember, we're bringing in less immigrants in the immediate term. We have the trade tariff situation happening. We've got a population that's still growing, right? I mean, we're slowing down, but we're still growing. And a seniors population that's continuing to grow at higher rates, right? So that's the interesting thing. The population is growing at half the rate of people on OAS, right? So it's going to catch up, right? If you keep going on this projection, it's going to catch up at some point. All right. Oh, cool. I see you guys in here. This is great. Okay. So mental health dynamics. So why do I want to talk about this? Shifting gears, we have, again, some really cool data now. I say cool, but it's also / disturbing. But we've got some really interesting data now telling us what's happened since COVID. And I know you all know that things went really astray, and we've always had to put a caveat. Well, but that was COVID. Well, we've got some more insight here on what has happened from a data perspective. So I can now give you some facts to kind of back up your assumptions or challenge your assumptions. So we definitely saw a prevalence rise from about 15% to 16.4% of Canadians that were experiencing mental health conditions. The peak was definitely 2021. It hit 16.8%. Don't worry, I have a nice diagram to show you this, but just kind of stay with me at the high level first. We actually saw a notable percentage drop of people actually receiving treatment in 2021. Makes sense, lockdown, okay? And that exposed how really fragile our systems were, especially in those remote and marginalized communities, so Indigenous communities, rural, remote communities, northern communities as well. At the same time, we saw some really interesting prescription data. So 1,138% spike in 2021. People were likely stockpiling. They had, this kind of overprescribing, maybe, who knows, right? We know it was a black swan event. By 2023, prescriptions are kind of came down, but they're still way higher than pre-pandemic level. So it really suggests that ongoing demand for mental health support. For those of you in the nonprofit sector that are at that front line, What this translates to probably is heavier caseloads, more complex issues, and clients with mental health challenges, plus that housing instability, and of course, that addictions component of mental health that is, always a consideration when we talk about mental health. So municipal provincial agencies thinking about telehealth services, partnering with nonprofits to reach underserved areas can really make that difference to build that systemic resilience for future crises. So that's some of the high level piece. The takeaway here is we had a massive spike of societal level trauma that induced mental health conditions and worsened pre-existing mental health conditions. Those manifested in immediate crises for vulnerable populations that already were struggling with intergenerational trauma or complex addictions or trimorbidity. But those lower risk situations never really went back to being non-issues. We have a tail, a COVID mental health tail, if you will, in terms of need and complexity that we're still dealing with. So what does that look like from a data perspective? I said, let's look at antidepressant use and why am I picking on this one? It's an interesting indicator that has been linked to it indicates higher levels of access for mental health treatment, right? You can't get antidepressant, whether it's depression or anxiety, those are much more frequent diagnoses as well. So we've got individuals treated, as you can see, this is 2021, but you see how it didn't really come down. That number continues to rise past 2021, right? Here we are, 6.6 million people having these prescriptions. So that's an interesting consideration. Look at prescriptions that were dispensed, right? So again, a steady rise in doses prescribed over time. And here's our units prescribed further as well. So that's, again, the overall message is everything's going up. Everything's going up in terms of mental health signals when it comes to really this is not, bipolar disorder, although we have data for that too. Like I wanted to show you something that's you can feel, closer to home where it's, you probably know somebody in your immediate family that has a prescription for SSNRIs, for instance. So that is really important. Okay, so now let's go back to the next data point here and tell you what's happening on this little interesting piece. The percentage annual change around antidepressant use. So here's the prevalence. So the previous stuff I was just showing you overall, we've got more people. But as a percent of the population, you see this 2021 and then an immediate drop of prevalence in antidepressant use and then a spike back up. So it's like, oh, you can kind of see the story. And I've seen these stories with my family too, where it's like, I'm okay. You know what? I'm okay. And then actually like, maybe I'm not okay, right? So there is explanations for this, that crisis peak past, but even 2023 are, again, if you think about it, they're kind of heading back up in terms of that piece. There's the individuals treated again as a percentage, and prescriptions, there's your prescriptions dispensed, right? So when we're looking at this on a more per capita versus percentages rather than just pure numbers, right? Then you can see these trends much more obviously. See, look at that stockpiling. That also means with the stockpiling that there's a lot potentially, like there's no way we just consumed this much more, right? That probably means that there's a lot of pills out there, right? In the informal markets and expired pills that are going in the garbage cans, all of that type of stuff. So I wouldn't be surprised if folks have already seen that happen, where this stockpile is going somewhere. Hopefully it's going properly in the right disposal, but maybe not. I also wanted to speak a little bit about the gender and regional variances that you might experience too. So what this bar chart tells you is that there's a significant gender gap in antidepressant use, specifically around young adults as well. I'm looking here at Atlantic Canada, Women ages 18 to 24 are about 30%, have about a 30% annual change compared to 11.4% of men. So again, the ratio of women to men, way higher, 2.69, right? This gender disparity, and we see this gender disparity, let's say in Alberta as well, less so, surprisingly, but lower and different prescription rates. So like I said before, you've got the Atlantic, much higher for women, but the ratio is lower between men and women in Alberta. So what does the gender and age disparity say? So are women facing greater stresses or just more likely to seek help? That's the perennial question here. Is there an underreporting among men due to stigma? For frontline service providers, these numbers suggest designing some outreach specifically for young men, for young women as well. Why is this happening, right? So why is this happening at these high growth rates in these younger populations? Super interesting. So I would definitely say this is an interesting one to watch out for. This is just showing you 2023, by the way, just because, you know, I don't want to take up too much time on this either. And then, oops, I showed you that one. This is the last one around mental health I wanted to show you. This is about the change in prevalence of mental health disorders. So I talked about antidepressants as kind of your, you know, whenever you go into the doctors, if you need a medication, they're probably going to start you on that. But there's much more complex mental health conditions to look for. So this data is looking at 2012 to 2022, and the blue is 2012 and the light blue is 2022. Hopefully my face is not in the way, but how you would read this chart is in the past 12 months, you know, have you had a major depressive episode? It was 4.7 in 2012. Now it's 7.6 just on that one. Look at the social phobia. It was 3, now it's 7.1. Generalized anxiety disorder, 2.6, now it's 5.2. Alcohol disorder, 2.2. I just wonder if it's switched out to cannabis a little bit, or if we got some other disorders going on, or are we increasing our antidepressant use so that's helping with some of these other disorders, right? What's happening there? So this is not just about the pandemic blip, right? That's my point here. So here's the past 12 months. Here's my lifetime one. Okay, it changes quite a bit over your lifetime. So in terms of the picture, so again, we're comparing our 2012 here and our 2022 as the lighter line. So now we can see alcohol use dropping. Interesting, right? Interesting. Major depressive episodes over somebody's lifetime gone up. Overall, social phobia, I mean, that makes sense, right? We were all stuck in there. And so for me, the ones that really stand out is this generalized anxiety disorder and the social phobia, and of course, the major episode. And this is why I was really highlighting those antidepressants, because that's generally what gets prescribed for GAD and these types of, and depression. Those are kind of your 101 in terms of prescriptions. There's other important things, but that's an interesting signal. So this to me says it's not just a pandemic blip, the mental health issues, but it's adding to a longer term trend in mental health needs and awareness, right? People are much more okay about talking about mental health. For providers, that means integrating those mental health expertise across multiple services from housing to youth programs, because chances are there's a mental health issue somewhere along the lines. I have not met a client in the social sector that did not have a mental health child condition, either diagnosed, undiagnosed, or at risk, at really high risk for it. So that's a consideration. For policymakers, municipally or provincially or regionally, staff might consider that stable funding around mental health initiatives rather than just that crisis short-term response. This is not going anywhere, is my point. This is an area to, you know, to really build resilience around and capacity around. All right, the last one that I'm going to highlight is around safety and crime. So those that are working on safety and well-being dynamics, or anything to do with with crime reduction, crime prevention, guns and gang strategies, etc. Let's talk about this. The high level takeaways, headlines are the crime severity index ticked up about 2% last year. And this was primarily driven by non-violent offenses. So things like fraud, shoplifting, car theft. But we also saw a really big jump in really disturbing aspects, such as child pornography offenses. That was up 52%. Again, improved cyber detection for sure, but not to take away from the disturbing levels. One is too many, right? Homicide rates, interestingly, dropped by 14% overall, which is great. Yet some of those longstanding discrepancies, so Indigenous people facing disproportionately higher homicide rates and women facing disproportionately higher levels of interpersonal and sexual assault rates, those persisted. We did not make progress on those aspects. From that frontline perspective, and for those in local government, increases in fraud and cyber crimes are probably going to mean an increase in victim support. Hate crimes also saw a 32% hike, especially based on religion and sexual orientation. All of that is going to strain those local responses that provide counseling or legal advocacy. And of course, tracking these patterns accurately is key, especially given that these become very hot button multiple election issues that can shift priorities for policing and social programming as well. So for sure, this is always comes up in elections. Couple of data points that I thought were super interesting on this. Let me show you the crime severity index. So here's the index coming down. Very nice, very nice. Here's the violent crime index coming up. Interesting. Okay, so the crime index overall is coming down, and then the non-violent one coming down. So that's nice, but again, there's still upticks from last year, and overall in the long term, you can see that it's still going up, right? Okay, and then our second to last data point, I wanted to show you this because it's a really interesting way of thinking about the issues. This is around violent incident crime rates per 100,000. So this is just looking at Alberta overall and normalizing the data. So it's one thing to show you an index and say, hey, it's going up, going down. What's happening as the population is growing? So you should always ask, whenever somebody presents data to you, just ask, hey, has this been normalized? Is this per capita, or are you just showing me, okay, it's gone up? Well, if my population doubled, then it's gone down, right? So here's the Alberta crime rate, just as an example. And then I wanted to show you Lethbridge, because this is one that's always trending higher in the crime index. And truly, it is out of whack with the Alberta average. I'll show you Cochrane, which is a higher income community and absolutely very low. This is about a 30,000 community. This is about 100,000 community. And there really is something happening for those mid-sized cities at around 100,000, or if you're on a fast track to 100,000, something is happening for sure. And as you can see here, Red Deer and Lethbridge, they're both about the same size. They're always one or two people off in their battles against each other. So it's showing 2019 all the way to 2023, and it's showing you this sharp rises and a disproportionate higher rate for those mid-sized communities. That's important because you're not the same as the Alberta average or the provincial average. And we see this pattern everywhere, that there's communities in this bucket, they usually haven't prepared well enough for their growth, right? So especially if their population growth is really fast, they haven't built the social infrastructure to prevent crime and mitigate risk. So if you are one of them, you really do have a great business case to say, I'm 30,000, and this is Cochrane, right? I'm 30,000, but they're going to be 100,000 in the next 10 years. So the message to them is, let's not be over here, right? Let's try to keep it under the Alberta average like we have been. Let's keep staying a really safe place to be as we grow, right? And there's no reason for this to happen, because we have great examples of cities that, avoid this situation. So same story happens around sexual assault. And I just wanted to show you this first. Here's Alberta and Canada around sexual assault. Overall, some stabilization per capita. Certain provinces are going to be higher than others. Alberta is always known to be higher. I didn't pull the other ones because I just wanted to show some examples today. Thunder Bay, there's obviously those 100,000 communities that I mentioned before. Red Deer, if you're not tracking it, Red Deer didn't start reporting on this until 2021, and look how high it was. So the importance of data is my point. Is you don't want to be, the highest sexual assault rates per capita and then haven't been collecting it, right? It's get going, right? Get going at Cochrane size, not at Red Deer size. Here's Kamloops as well as a BC example. And then interestingly, the big cities. Why is this so much lower? Is it that there's so many more social supports in place? Is it that it's less reported than the Alberta average or the Canada average? Really interesting research questions. But just the takeaway is group yourself with like communities and learn from their experience. Don't use the averages, and yet learn from, what other cities might be learning along their path to growth as well. So that's it for the data story. I'll wrap it up with a bit of an interesting one, just because we are in the tech space and we love our tech. If you haven't been keeping a close eye on what's happening with the Trump situation, so this, if you don't know, this guy, this with the cool shoes, that's Sam Altman. He's the CEO of OpenAI, and this is Trump announcing a major new Stargate initiative that is set to launch U.S. into the true AI wars against China this time, not against the USSR. That's a different thing. But the AI wars are really starting to shake up. It's not going to look the same. If you notice, there's just much more activity happening in this space now to look out for. So U.S. government is now deploying OpenAI technologies within government. And so what does that mean for surveillance? What does that mean for expectations from what civil society relationship is with the state? Really interesting questions. But just to give you an idea of what propelled this issue, if you've taken a look at DeepSeek, which is OpenAI's competitor, brand new, just dropped 2 days ago, I believe, to the online. You can check it out. The takeaway here is how good it is with much less resources, and it's owned by China. So it's really threatening the AI dominance that US seems to have through companies like OpenAI up to now. Now, what's interesting about DeepSeek is how biased it is. So this is Tiananmen Square. If you ask DeepSeek what Tiananmen Square is, it's going to give you a Chinese government structured response. And of course, if you ask ChatGPT to give you black market drugs, they also will tell you it cannot do evil things. Point being, it's so cheap, right? So it's so cheap to deploy these things now. I think they said that it cost them about $5 million. You know who has $5 million? Oh, I don't know. Every organized crime ring has $5 million. AKA, it's not about the Chinese. It's about the elements of the criminal underground, right? So be on the lookout for this, because it's the accessibility of really advanced technologies. And what's interesting about DeepSeek and OpenAI's new agent is it can actually take over your computer and do tasks for you, which is so cool. I love for it to book my restaurant. But it can also do other things like, I don't know, empty my bank account, send emails to all my friends asking for money. It can take over your computers if you, again, and what's fake anymore? Their stuff is so good, you guys. Like I almost fall for it. And I use AI every single day for like every single minute for everything. Like I almost clicked on the wrong thing. It's going to be like your fake DocuSign. It's going to be your fake bank statement. It's going to be your, my latest one was my NordVPN subscription. Like they fake everything, and it's so good. So absolutely double check all your stuff. You do not want to be the guy or the gal or person that's accidentally caused a cyber attack on your entire organization. So yeah, doing some awareness on this is really critical for folks. I can't stress that enough. So in parting, my takeaways are review those contingency plans. We're heading for troubled, interesting waters. Review those game plans. Take a look at what programs are specifically at risk under a new regime, and get those data points brushed up, get ready to go. Collaboration across sectors. Going at it alone is never going to be as meaningful as having coalitions around shared priorities, right? So you saw that out of the Association of Municipalities, not around homelessness, for instance, last week, and their campaigns, really good, data-driven, and everybody speaking with the same voice as municipalities in Ontario, because they knew this election was going to happen. So they wanted to make sure their priorities were there, and they did their homework for a year before that campaign was going. Favoring data over opinion, and this is what my message was with our team is, we do data, we work with all types of parties, because we're trying to be objective and let the data do the talking. And it's not up to us to do the interpretation from a political perspective. Our job is to give the evidence for the best decision and what's right, for what we feel is right and evidence-led for that particular issue. So I would say that's kind of my rule of thumb. Advocate and educate. Of course, some of you are in advocacy roles. You should be beating on every door right now for sure, and getting those meetings going with allies and detractors, right? Figure out who the enemies are as well. And then stay curious and adaptive, right? And there's never going to be a stable time for us in this world, because complex social issues are always going to be there, and they're always going to be dynamic. So next webinar, and then I'll see about a couple of questions for the last 10 minutes. I mentioned coalitions. This is a really cool piece of work we did. Probably, I don't know, Jessie from my team says it's the most important thing she's ever done in her career. And I believe her. It was a ton of work, and 444 communities that contributed to this effort in Ontario. And it was really to understand what was happening around the homelessness crisis there. So we're going to be doing a deep dive with our colleagues from the Association of Municipalities of Ontario. So Michael Jacek, if anybody knows him, he's their social policy superstar there. Him and Jesse are going to present on this together, and how they managed to get 100% participation in Ontario to contribute data to this report, which is that was probably the most important number, besides the concerning fact that we have about 81,000 people that are experiencing homelessness in that province alone. So please join us for that piece. It's going to be a really, really exciting insight into how to use data for these massive collaboratives around common shared priorities. So thank you for that. I'm so sorry about my annoying head, as I said, and hopefully we can now take a look at some of your Q&A. Oh, thank you. Yeah, sorry about my head. And I didn't want to, disrupt you guys with coming back in and out. So let's see, I'm going to take a look at some of these presentation questions. Okay, I'll just make sure. Yeah, if there's any questions, I'm happy to stay on for another, I think we have another 7 minutes here. Thank you for your leadership making data meaningful. Thank you. Thank you. I also tried something new with the animations. Hopefully you guys like that. It's way harder to do. I learned that from a really cool project we're doing on gender-based violence in Alberta. And Cochrane was one of the communities, but Banff is another one. And all of these trends, how they manifest locally is so different, and how to get people excited about, I know, let's be honest, it's boring facts, but the way you do it is to make it more exciting to present and kind of, tell a data story with it. So hopefully that resonated for you guys. Good.
Lena, there's a question here.
Yeah.
Chat to everyone. What are the rules around using homeless versus unhoused wording when speaking?
Ooh, excellent question. Excellent question. Well, first of all, it signals where you stand politically. So depends where you, depends on who you're talking to, right? So the politically more appropriate is actually to say people that are experiencing homelessness, so kind of using people first language for sure, even if you're using the term homelessness. People saying the unhoused population, I would say probably it's probably more accurate, more proper to say people who are experiencing a lack of safe, affordable housing, people that are experiencing sleeping in encampments. So kind of people first language. Unhoused or homeless, it's, you know what I mean? Like it's kind of like putting the kind of the blame thing. But be careful though, because I have also seen in certain regions, when you say unhoused, the decision maker sometimes sees you as, oh, you're on that side, you're against me, right? So, you know, watch who you're talking to and what terminology they use, not to say which one's proper, which one's not. These terminologies always change. People with lived experience of homelessness have kind of come out and talk more about experiencing or using the unhoused term rather than homelessness, because it denotes that you don't have a home. And for Indigenous populations, for instance, that's a really important distinction, because they have a home land, they have a home community, this is their home, but they don't have housing. So people who don't have housing, but again, I would still suggest putting the person first aspect to it. Unsheltered, yeah, people who don't have shelter, don't have a safe housing. Yeah.
Got another question here.
Sure.
So you work across communities and municipalities all over the country. Is data standardized so that it is easily comparable?
No, it's not. It's not what you actually, but there are ways to do it. So in the homelessness example, I'm not going to steal too much of the thunder from that team. But what you do is, you can find data sets that are standardized, and you can have statistical techniques to fill in the gaps as well. So for instance, if you have, an easy example would be like if you have like 80% coverage and you need to figure out a statistically defensible way to do the last 20%, that there's a statistical technique for that. If the other way is also to look at like specific subsets of that data. So if you have really, really, really good data on overall trend over time, but your data at subpopulations is really crappy, but you've got colleagues that have a very similar community archetype, like think of your community as, you know, there's probably other communities like you out there in terms of data characteristics. So if you find those in a statistically good, like solid way, you can say like, well, I'm like this, like this, like this, like this, and here's how we're this very, very similar. And then you say, well, I got data from those other ones. So then it's like, it's a defensible position to say, well, I'm going to assume a similar breakdown of those subpopulations. I'm going to make it a little bit higher because I have a higher immigrant inflow rate. I have a higher, you know, gender disparity in my seniors population. So the point being is, no, there isn't, but there's ways to mitigate for that now with data collection and data wrangling and data analysis. Essentially, data science can help you there. Random thought that is more specific to the individual data points rather than presentation, but the spike and drop in antidepressants, perhaps affected by absence and guidance on lowering and tapering by doctors' medication leaflets. I've seen this play out a lot. Oh, okay, interesting. Perhaps no longer the need for the same dose or support because it was time limited, like a COVID thing. So they lower or come off, but they have withdrawal and relapse. 100%. Yeah, well, it's like, I should be good. There's no more COVID, right? No, that's not how mental health works, right? Like you don't just like cancel it out. It's like it never happened. It sticks, unfortunately sticks with you. Standardized definitions of the data. Yes, there's been standardization. So Ontario, 444 municipalities around homelessness is a really good example. Childcare in Alberta, we're working on something with Alberta around childcare as well. So there absolutely are efforts, depending on the sector and the region, to do that. Yes, depends on which sector you're referring to. And do you have recommendations for courses, resources for advocacy to improve data collection analysis, particularly when gathering data from municipalities? Well, ooh, that's a good one. Maybe that's a really good next webinar for us around data collection. I'll leave that with my team. Yeah, that's a good one. That's a really good question. I don't, but I should. I love that idea. We can probably put that in our backlog to look at a data for advocacy 101, like how to use data, and we can show you guys how to use AI to make your advocacy platforms or something. I can do a lunch and learn if you're interested. Love that. Okay. Cool. Okay. People like that. Cool. Cool. Yeah. Let's arm you with evidence. That's the best. It's always the best defense, right? Is the evidence. So awesome. I'm going to leave it there, y'all. Hopefully this was informative and gives you some ideas of 2025, and we'll hopefully see you at the next one. Thanks so much.